They say you never forget the moment you lose someone you love. But what happens when you find out they were never lost, just hiding? Beloved, welcome again to Unbroken Courage. I'm Amara, and before I tell you this unbelievable story, I want you to drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from today. And let me ask you something. What would you do if you discovered your husband faked his own death? This story still makes me pause every time I think about it. Because when Melissa came to see me, she looked like a woman who had cried every tear there was to cry. She sat across from me, her voice trembling, and said, "Amara, I buried my husband. I touched his coffin, and now I've seen him walking down the street." It all began 8 months earlier. Melissa and Gerald had been married for 9 years. They weren't perfect, but they had built a comfortable life together. A modest home, 2 cars, and dreams of starting a family soon. Gerald worked as a contractor for an international company. He often traveled, sometimes gone for weeks. Melissa trusted him completely, the kind of trust that made her defend him even when others warned her, "He's too secretive, Mel." But then came the call that shattered everything. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when her phone rang. "Mrs. Williams," the voice said, "this is Officer Crane from the Lagos Metropolitan Police. I'm afraid I have bad news." Her body went numb as she heard the words, "Your husband was involved in a fatal car crash last night. We found his belongings, and I'm sorry, but there were no survivors." Melissa collapsed on the floor. The days that followed were a blur. Family members gathered. Friends brought food. The company Gerald worked for sent a letter of condolence confirming the incident. Even the insurance company reached out. She could barely breathe. She said, "Amara, I kept expecting him to walk through the door and say, 'Honey, it's just a mistake.' But he never did." After the funeral, the house felt like a tomb. She stopped cooking. She left his shoes by the door untouched. Every night she sat in the living room whispering, "I miss you." For months, she carried his memory like a ghost that refused to leave. But then, something strange began to happen. A few weeks after the funeral, Melissa received an email from one of Gerald's colleagues overseas. The message read, "Hi, Melissa. I just wanted to check if Gerald's back in town yet. He hasn't returned my calls." She stared at the screen, confused. She replied, "Gerald passed away 3 months ago." Minutes later, a reply came back. "That's impossible. I saw him at the airport last week." Her heart raced. She thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone looked like him. But deep down, something started to stir inside her. So she went back to the police station. She asked to see the report again. They told her the file was sealed, but one officer, a young man with kind eyes, whispered, "Ma'am, something's not right. The body wasn't properly identified. It was burned beyond recognition." Melissa felt dizzy. "Then how did they know it was him?" He sighed. "We only found his wallet near the wreck." Her knees gave way. That night, she couldn't sleep. She went through Gerald's old things, bank statements, company files, insurance papers. And that's when she found it. A recently updated life insurance policy, dated just 2 months before his accident. The amount? $500,000. Beneficiary? Melissa Williams. At first, she thought maybe it was his way of protecting her, but something didn't sit right. She remembered how he'd been strangely distant before his trip, avoiding eye contact, checking his phone constantly. Her heart whispered, "He didn't die. He ran." She told me, "Amara, I couldn't prove it, but every part of my soul screamed that something was wrong." 2 weeks later, she went to the insurance company to follow up on the claim. They said the money was still being processed, awaiting verification from his employer abroad. But the woman handling her file said something that froze her blood. "It's odd," she said. "Someone else called last week, a man, asking about this same policy, said he was your lawyer." Melissa frowned. "What was his name?" The woman checked the record. "Gerald Williams." That's when she knew. She went home and sat on the couch, trembling, whispering, "He's alive. My husband is alive." Her first reaction was disbelief, then anger, then grief all over again. But this time, the tears weren't from love. They were from betrayal. She said to me, "Amara, I buried a man who buried me first." From that moment, she began to investigate quietly. She didn't tell anyone, not her friends, not even her pastor. She went through phone records, traced bank transactions, and found a pattern. He had been wiring small amounts of money to an unknown account in another city every 2 weeks. When she tracked the address linked to that account, her heart stopped. It belonged to a woman named Tanya Blake. And when she saw Tanya's picture on social media, the dates, the locations, the smiling photos, she realized Gerald had been building another life all along. The pieces were falling together. The accident, the insurance, the secret woman. But Melissa was no fool. She said, if he faked his death for money, I'll make sure the money becomes his downfall. So she made a plan. When she came to tell me the rest of the story, she smiled for the first time since the session began. Amara, she said, the same funeral he planned to fake became the one he walked into. And beloved, that's where I'll leave you for today. In the next chapter, we'll uncover how Melissa turned her pain into power, setting a trap so divine even the police couldn't believe how perfectly justice came back around. Make sure you're subscribed and turn on the notification bell, because what happens next will remind you that the truth has a timing, and when it strikes, no lie can stand. Let's continue. When Melissa discovered Tanya's name, she didn't rush to anger. She told me, Amara, I cried for one night and then I stopped crying, because that's when I realized God was giving me the script for his downfall. She started moving with precision, quiet, calm, strategic. She said if Gerald thought I'd stay the grieving widow, he was wrong. First, she went to the insurance company and told them she'd discovered inconsistencies in her husband's documents. They froze the payout immediately. Then she contacted an old friend, a journalist named Sam Evers, who worked for a national investigative news outlet. She told him everything: the faked death, the suspicious policy, the mistress. Sam listened quietly and said, Melissa, if this man tries to collect that money himself, we can catch him red-handed. And that's how the plan began. A few weeks later, the insurance company received a phone call from someone claiming to be Gerald's attorney. He asked when the payout would be released. They requested he come in person to verify documents. He agreed, foolishly. What Gerald didn't know was that every move he made was being watched. The journalist coordinated with the police to set up surveillance at the insurance office. Melissa didn't go. She wanted justice, not revenge. She stayed home, praying and waiting. The day Gerald returned, it was raining, almost exactly like the morning she was told he'd died. He walked into the building wearing a hat, dark glasses, and a trimmed beard, thinking he looked different enough to fool everyone. But what he didn't know was that the officers already had his old passport photo. When he walked up to the counter and handed over his ID, the clerk scanned it and pressed a silent alert under the desk. 2 officers appeared within seconds. Mr. Gerald Williams, one said, "You're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and attempted insurance deception." He froze. "You've got the wrong man," the officer smiled. That's what most dead men say. When news broke, it spread like wildfire. Man fakes death for insurance, walks into his own trap. The entire community was stunned, but Melissa stayed silent. She told me, "I didn't celebrate. I just sat by the window and said, 'You see, God, I didn't have to fight. You fought for me.'" But what no one expected was what came next. Gerald was released on bail a few weeks later, pending trial. And instead of hiding, he did something unbelievable. He came back home. Melissa said, "The day I saw him at my gate, I thought it was a ghost. He stood there, drenched from the rain, his eyes hollow, his pride gone. 'Melissa,' he said softly, 'I made a mistake.' She looked at him and said, 'No, Gerald, you made a choice.' He begged her to listen, but she wouldn't let him in. So he left, humiliated, desperate, and still clinging to the hope that she'd forgive him. A few days later, she got a letter from his lawyer. It said he wanted to meet in person to resolve financial matters. Her first instinct was to say no. But then Sam, the journalist, had an idea. "Melissa, what if we stage the meeting at a place he'll never forget?" That's when the idea of the fake funeral was born. Melissa worked quietly with the police and the journalist to plan it. She said, "If he faked his death to profit, let the lie bury him for real." They decided to host a memorial service to mark 6 months since his passing. The media got wind of it and promised to cover it as a human interest story. Widow honors late husband, now proven fraudster. But Melissa had another reason for doing it. She knew Gerald's ego. She said if he hears about the event, he won't resist showing up to see who's mourning him. And she was right. The day of the service came. The church was filled with friends, family, journalists, and cameras. Melissa stood at the front, wearing black again, but this time she wasn't grieving. She was waiting. Halfway through the program, she felt it, that cold awareness that someone was watching. She looked up, and there he was, standing at the back of the church. Gerald, alive. He thought he could slip in unnoticed, hiding behind the crowd, but the cameras caught him immediately. Reporters began whispering, "Is that? It's him. That's the dead man." Within seconds, flashbulbs exploded. The pastor froze mid-sentence, and Melissa, calm as ever, turned toward him and said clearly, "Welcome home, Gerald. You're just in time for your own funeral." The church erupted. Police officers, disguised among the attendees, moved swiftly. Gerald tried to run, but the aisle was too crowded. One of them grabbed him just as he reached the door. He shouted, "Melissa, please tell them I'm not a criminal!" She looked him dead in the eye and said, "No, Gerald. You're not a criminal. You're a coward, and cowards bury themselves." That moment went viral across the country. News outlets called it the real funeral of a fake death. But Melissa didn't gloat. She told me, "Amara, revenge never crossed my mind. I just wanted peace." And she got it, not from his punishment, but from her own strength. When she finished her story, I asked her, "Melissa, if you could say one thing to other women watching, what would it be?" She smiled softly and said, "Never let someone's deceit make you doubt your own truth. Even when you're buried under lies, rise." Beloved, sometimes life lets people bury themselves with their own schemes. You don't need to dig their grave. You just need to keep standing in your truth. Because as this story shows, what's done in darkness will always walk into the light, even if it takes walking into a funeral to get there. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Unbroken Courage, because stories like this remind us that no matter how deep betrayal goes, truth always climbs higher. The day after the funeral, the story was everywhere. News anchors repeated it, bloggers dissected it. Social media exploded with the headline, "Man Fakes Death for Insurance, Caught at His Own Memorial." Melissa didn't hide. She went back to work the next morning like nothing had happened. But deep down she told me, "Amara, it wasn't over. It was just beginning." Gerald was facing charges for fraud, identity theft, and obstruction of justice. But what shocked her most was the letter his lawyer sent, demanding half of everything she owned, claiming it as marital property. "Imagine," she said, "the same man who tried to bury me now wants to share my house." She smiled faintly, but I was ready this time. Melissa had learned her lesson well. Months before the fake funeral, when she began to suspect his betrayal, she had quietly met with her attorney. She restructured all her assets, her house, her savings, even her small business, transferring ownership into a family trust under her maiden name. She said, "He thought I was just grieving, but I was preparing." So when Gerald's lawyer made his claim, the court laughed it out. There was nothing for him to take. At the trial, Melissa sat quietly in the front row. Gerald refused to look at her. He was thinner, paler, the kind of man who'd spent too much time running from his own lies. When the judge asked if he had any final words, he said softly, "I never meant to hurt her. I just wanted to start over." Melissa whispered to herself, "You already did, without me." The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict, guilty. Gerald was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but what Melissa did next surprised everyone. She stood up, walked to the witness stand, and said, "Your Honor, I forgive him." Gasps rippled through the room. She explained, "Forgiveness isn't for him, it's for me, so I can live free, not chained to anger." After the trial, she told me, "Amara, I used to think closure meant justice. Now I know closure is peace." She sold the house where they had lived together, moved to a new city, started a charity for women who'd been deceived or abused, and when she told her story publicly, she never used his name. She said, "The point isn't who betrayed me, it's that I survived it." Months later, she received a letter from prison. It was from Gerald. The handwriting was shaky. He apologized, said he couldn't sleep at night knowing how deeply he'd hurt her. He ended with one line, "I watched the funeral video every day in my cell. That was the day I died for real." Melissa said she read it once, then placed it in her Bible, not as a memory of pain, but as proof that truth always resurrects what lies try to bury. When she finished her story, I looked at her and said, "Melissa, your story is more than betrayal, it's resurrection." She smiled and nodded. "Amara, I thought I lost everything, but God was just clearing space for better." Beloved, sometimes people dig your grave with lies, but they forget who holds the shovel of truth. Melissa didn't fight dirty, she fought wisely. And in doing so, she showed us that you don't need revenge, just the courage to stand still and let justice do what it does best. You may be listening to this right now, thinking about someone who hurt you deeply. But hear me, your story isn't over where they left you. Like Melissa, you'll rise stronger, wiser, and freer than you've ever been. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, beloved. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Unbroken Courage for more true stories that remind us truth never dies. It only waits for the right moment to stand up.